Welcome to this Women in OR and Analytics event, OR and Analytics for a Better World in 5 minutes. I'm Ruth. I'm the chair of the events subcommittee of WORAN. The chair, Francis O'Brien, is on holiday, as are very many other people. So, including one of our speakers. And down there on the right, you can see the list of sponsors for Women in OR and Analytics. We have had a whole series of online events, monthly online events, ever since, almost since the very start of lockdown. And the idea of them is that give people a chance to meet up with other people in a relaxed environment, to have a chat, to meet, gives you a chance to grow your network if you can. The idea of WORAN itself was that people would be able to build networks, and we're trying to do that online as well, so that you can develop the number of people that you know, you hear interesting things, learn interesting things from them, and hopefully have fun. We have 2 big events coming up with 2 amazing female speakers. Cynthia Barnhart, who has just stepped down as the Chancellor of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, will be talking about bringing OR and analytics mindset to leadership. And we've been trying to have an annual autumn lecture since we started. Unfortunately, we've only been able to have one of those in person. But this time, again, we're online, which means we can have Elise Del Rosario, who is in the Philippines, and is therefore less possible for us to get her if we were having a physical event. She's a truly amazing woman with considerable achievements, including having been the person who delivers your San Miguel bottles to you. Well, not directly, but she was head of OR at the San Miguel Corporation. So that's what we've got coming up. I said there'd be a couple more Slido questions about you. So the first is if you could get onto Slido and let us know where you work. We are dominated so far by public sector and university. And none of these, which I guess is retired people like me. And Amita, I could see you haven't answered this. It looks like you might be the only private sector person here. So
I think so.
That is, so maybe the private sector people are just too busy to come to something like this, or they're all on holiday, or we're not reaching them. So, or they haven't worked out how to use Slido. Well, so some of those will be the case. Okay, so it'd be particularly interesting then to see the answers to the next question, because the public sector is somewhere where you're supposed to be quite satisfied about making social impact. So I'm just going to move on. Sorry if you haven't had a chance to answer that, but thanks very much for those. And I'm going to try and move on anyway to the next question, which is how you feel about the level of impact that you're having in your work. And I just spotted my typo. Okay, so people are a lot slower to answer this. I'm guessing that we are. Right. So I think that's quite interesting. Oh, there's lots of typos, aren't there? I think it's very impressive, people's desire to make more impact than they're doing in their day job. And I think it's interesting that in spite of that applies. I would probably apply in the private sector, but it applies quite widely. But we've still got 1 in 5 who are very happy with what they're doing. Okay, thank you all very much for responding to that. I think I better move on to the programme. We're going to have our first set of 5-minute talks. Oh, there is a typo there as well, from Emilia, Gloria, and Shamim. Then we're going to go into some small group discussion inspired by the talks, and then a second set of talks. With 20 of us, I think there's 21 participants. I think that might be enough. We'll see how the first group discussion goes. We were talking about maybe there not being enough people to make it worth going into small group discussions for the second one and keeping in plenary. But we'll perhaps see how the first set of discussions goes. We will try to spread these speakers out amongst the small groups, and the topics for small group discussions will be basically to introduce yourselves, and then you may have questions and comments for the speaker, thoughts about the other talks, or thoughts about the theme that you want to pick up. But I'm not going to spend too long on this now, because I think it's probably time to move on to our speakers. And our first speaker I'd like to introduce is Emilia, who is working at Imperial College London, and she's working on cyber resilience in healthcare. So Emilia, if you would like to, I've got to stop share, sorry, whoops, and invite you to share your screen.
Can you see my first slide? And now I try to start with a...
Yeah. Do you want to move on to slideshow before okay? You're ready? Yeah, that looks great. You ready to go?
Okay.
Thank you very much. Off you go.
Many thanks for having me, Ruth, and welcome to Cybergeddon and Healthcare Preparing for the Worst. Yes, it's a provocative title, and it's deliberately chosen to emphasize the extreme threats coming with our new digitized healthcare world. And yes, digitization in healthcare has led to significant improvements in medical care, as shown in the left figure. That's definitely true. We are able to treat diseases more accurately, treat more patients. We can use robotic surgery and can provide better access via, for instance, remote consultation. These are all great achievements, and this is a positive side of digitization. However, security cannot keep pace with these extreme developments, as shown in the right figure. For instance, last year, healthcare was the most, and I really would like to stress that, was the most targeted sector by cyber criminals worldwide. There was a 45% increase in attacks on healthcare providers, while other sectors haven't experienced such an increase, even not the financial sector. And this is simply because it's easy money. Healthcare is an easy victim, using outdated IT systems, almost no investment in IT security, lack of IT experts, and I would say more critical, lack of awareness that cybersecurity is a patient safety issue that had already led to dramatic consequences around the world. So if we look at healthcare systems consisting of, for instance, hospitals, then there were already several attacks in the past where hospitals were unable to access their digital systems, so that staff were forced to revert to manual process, postpone appointments and surgeries, and even close entire departments and emergency rooms. And in this case, ambulances had to be redirected to patients transferred to other hospitals. So for instance, last year, a patient in Germany died because the University Hospital Düsseldorf had to close its emergency department, and the patient died on the way to the other one. And last month, the Irish healthcare system experienced the worst cyber attack ever, severely impacting critical services such as cancer and children's care, and they're still trying to recover, by the way. And so we are not even close to being able to assess this far-reaching consequences for patients, in this case, children, and also the relatives. So yes, if we don't do anything against it, Cybergeddon is indeed on the way. And this is why the objective of our research is to minimize the negative impact of cyber attacks on patients. And we've developed an optimization model to minimize the number of untreated patients by selecting and implementing efficient preparation measures before a cyber attack occurs. And our key recommendation, the key result, is to define staff training, access control, and so-called user and entity behavior analytics as mandatory measures. However, we know that most hospitals in the UK have incredible difficulty meeting even the minimum requirements. And this is why it's so important that decision makers understand cybersecurity as a patient safety issue, which requires commitment and investment. And our numerical tests have shown that even a moderate budget increase of 7% would already lead to a significant increase in improvement in cyber resilience. But the problem is that while these solutions may be technically optimal, they may not be accepted by hospital staff. For instance, multi-factor authentication is a very powerful tool, but it's often bypassed by staff, simply because it's time-consuming and can be devastating in emergency situations. So we need security solutions that are technically efficient, but are also accepted by medical staff and are secure by design. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention and happy for the questions then afterwards. Thank you. Stop sharing.
Well, thank you very much. You had a full 20 seconds to go, Amelia, but thank you very much. As somebody who's just about to go into a hospital that lost all its computer systems last week, I'm very appreciative of the work that you're doing. So thank you, and I'm sure that we all are. Okay, so congratulations on that. And can I invite Glory as our next speaker? Now, you may have read Glory's biography in the description of this. Sorry, I've got a phone going in the background. You may have read Glory's biography. It's out of date because Glory has now received her PhD and is ready to move on. So congratulations, Glory. Would you like to start sharing your screen to tell us some of what was useful about your PhD?
Okay, sure. Yeah, can you all hear and see my screen?
That's great. Yes, thank you. When you're ready?
Yeah, sure, I'm ready.
Yeah, okay, off you go then.
Yeah, so I'm Glory, and thank you, Ruth, for inviting me, and welcome everyone. So today I'll be talking about critical nodes and how can we find them. So the idea is that network systems, that there are few nodes, few elements of network system that ensure connectivity, that ensure network performance. And why this is interesting and positive is also, the previous speaker talked about cybersecurity. It also poses threats because attackers are also exploiting that. And the idea is that we as network owners or people who develop network want to assess our network first to identify those critical elements, those nodes whose degradation or whose removal, whose loss or failure would expose the network to degradation, would lead to a maximum disconnectivity. So the idea is to identify those networks and to fortify them. So and the critical node detection problem has application in several areas. So for example, we depend on supply chain network for food and a couple of other things to get to us. So the owners of this network will want to identify those nodes in the network whose failures or whatever happens to them would lead to them not being able to meet up with demands. So because there are contracts you need to meet, and having not to meet these things in time would obviously incur some costs. Also for terrorist networks, some of this network depend on the criminals or the terrorists being able to communicate effectively so that they can mount an attack. So from a security perspective, identifying the people, the key players in the network would ensure that we neutralize them and break down their communication network. Also in disease epidemiology, so identifying, we cannot vaccinate everyone, even though at the current moment we have the vaccines available. At the initial stage of epidemics, you cannot isolate everyone, you cannot vaccinate everyone. So you want to identify the people that are critical, so such that isolating them would reduce the ability of the virus to propagate. And you have a whole lot of other applications here. And so because we want to identify, the key thing is, how do we measure this connectivity? So existing metrics focus on network fragmentation. So the idea is to break down the network into components such that if you're not in a specific component, you cannot communicate. So if there's no part connecting, they cannot establish connectivity. That is good, that is important, but we know that across some of this application, when you think about telecommunication network, being able to transmit data or information, whatever it is important, but it's also equally important, like in case of voice messages and video conferences. You don't want to have distortion, and this has to do with the quality of service, and it relates to distance, the speed, and you don't want to have lags to say. And also in transportation network, when we are booking flights or when we want to book items, or buy items on Amazon, we realize that we tend to pay more when we require the items to arrive faster. So we have just-in-time logistics. So this gives us an idea that more cost or more price is placed upon the shorter or time-bound events. So telling us that distances are important. And sometimes, because we don't have all resources at our disposal, we cannot fortify all of the nodes. So if we cannot totally fragment the network, can we be able to detect if there are changes in the network? So if an enemy is tampering with our network, can we identify that there are some deviation and spot it on time to mitigate that? So just to illustrate this with an example, so the idea behind the new metric of distance-based connectivity is that we actually, in the objective, we incorporate a cost where we penalize shorter paths.
10 seconds, Glory.
Okay, so using this as an example, unfortunately, we don't have time to get an answer. Which of these nodes, 7 or 4, will be more critical if we are to attack this network? So based on all of the other metrics, the fragmentation metrics, 4 and 7 fragment the network equally. You have 2 components. The largest network here has 6 components. Same with this one, there are 6 nodes. But whereas when you're looking at specific commodities, so 3 and 5, whereas in this you have the length as 4. If you're to delete node 4, if you delete node 7, you realize that the path, you still have 2 hops. So the path here is shorter. This just is a little illustration, but it could have bigger consequences in larger networks. So that's me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You just borrowed Emilia's 20 seconds, but thank you very much for that, Glory. And it does seem as if it's really important and potentially useful work. So that's that's quite an eye-opener, I think. We're going to finish this half with Shamim Rahman from Department of Health. So Shamim this is be the third the third talk that's mentioned health, and the second that is about big health issues, but completely different ones. So when you're ready, do you want to get the slideshow set up, Shamim? And then okay, you okay to go? I think you might.
Sorry.
Oh,
yeah. Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Then that's good enough. Okay, so
sorry, I just need to make sure I can go back.
okay,
Let me. Sorry, I'm trying to.
not to worry.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm ready now.
You're
Thank
ready?
you.
Okay,
Yeah.
off you go. Thank you very much.
So yeah, as Ruth mentioned, so I'm going to talk about another health application of analytics again. So I work at the Department of Health and Social Care. This project that I'm going to talk about was delivered at pace just in 9 months by a range of organizations across the public sector, but also academia. And it was called COVID-19 Population Risk Assessment powered by Q-COVID. So if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a group of people called the clinically extremely vulnerable that were advised to shield. So they were advised not to leave their house at all for the first 3 months of the pandemic. And then at subsequent points at future peaks as well, they were advised to shield. And this is because some people were identified in the beginning through clinical expertise that because of the clinical conditions that they had, they were more likely to have serious health outcomes from catching COVID and then being hospitalized or dying from it. So we knew that this particular cohort of people needed extra protection. And initially, this was just done on clinical conditions, as I mentioned. But as the pandemic unfolded, we started to get to know much more about what puts people at risk of catching and dying from COVID. So our Chief Medical Officer, who you're all probably very familiar with now, Chris Whitty, commissioned a predictive model to take a much more data-driven approach to identifying who's at risk of serious outcomes from COVID. This model was commissioned by commissioned to and delivered by NAVTAG and the University of Oxford. The model itself is called Q-COVID. It's a multivariable risk prediction model that takes much more into account than just singular clinical conditions. So it looked at clinical comorbidities, it looked at things like ethnicity, deprivation, age as well, which we know is a huge driver of risk for COVID, and takes all of those and looks at the risk factors and built a survival analysis model. The challenge then was we had to apply this to the NHS. So, for those of you who've worked in using academic models, it's quite different when you have to apply it to real systems, millions of health records held by NHS Digital. Setting up technological platforms to be able to run this at scale. So that's why it took months. So we had to look at things like missing data linkages, also ethical, kind of medical, legal things that we had to account for when you are rolling things that are like this out at scale. And the idea behind doing this was to protect and prioritize for vaccination the highest risk groups. It was delivered at the beginning of this year in February, which you'll remember is when the vaccination program was rolling out. So the COVID-19 PRA, as what we call it for shorthand, it met the highest standards of assurance. The research itself was published at the BMJ, which is one of the top medical journals. And we also commissioned an external validation of Q-COVID from the Office for National Statistics. So applying the academic model to an independent data set, which was a much larger data set, and it performed really well in that independent validation as well. The C statistic was about over 0.9, which is absolutely excellent in terms of validation performance. So what did this lead to? So it led to nationwide improvements in patient safety. Through applying the PRA, we were able to identify an extra 1.5 million people that were at high risk, and we added them to the shielded patient list. And 820,000 of those were prioritized for vaccine. It's only a subset of the 1.5 million because some had already been given the vaccination due to their age. It's the first known precision public health intervention of its kind in the world. It relieved burden on GPs having to identify people who are clinically extremely vulnerable. It also raised a lot of public awareness of what are the key kind of risk factors for Q-COVID. So things like ethnicity, deprivation but also particular clinical conditions. And it's all published in the BMJ paper about which ones those are if you're interested in having a look. So it was really well received. particularly in some of the local authorities that were the highest deprived, they added more people to the shielded patient list, which shows that the model itself was working. And it created sort of multifactorial risk profiles for people. And we had some good sort of feedback from patients and GPs and the Runnymede Trust as well about really the intersectional nature of identifying this and tackling health inequalities. It's got future uses as well, so future pandemic preparedness, population health management, and international reach as well.
We're on time. So Shamim,
if I can
take 5 seconds to wrap up.
Yeah, so these are all the organizations that have contributed, so I just wanted to acknowledge them.
Thank you. I promised you a 10-second warning, which I gave, but I was muted, so it wasn't terribly helpful. That was really interesting. Thank you, Shamim. And another sort of very impressive, I think, extremely important to all of us. I'm sure we all appreciate that. So that wraps up our first set of speakers, and I found that really interesting, even though I was clock watching for a lot of the time. So thank you very much. Now the next step is that we go into small breakout rooms for it'll be something like 12 to 15 minutes. Now, there's a warning about this, is that sometimes we find that people who we think are here aren't there for the breakout rooms. So if you go into a breakout room and you find, if you give it a couple of minutes, but if you find that there is nobody else in there, then do come back into the main room and we'll move you into a larger group. But we'll be looking for groups of about 3 or 4, so quite small for good discussion of what you've heard and the issues that are coming out of it. So can I ask, I'm not sure if behind that OR screen it's Hannah or Karen, but Hannah or Karen, unless there are any immediate audience questions, if there's anything anybody...
seconds, I'm just setting them up now.
Okay. Oh, we've had a couple of people who've disappeared at this stage, so it will be quite small numbers. If anybody has any questions in the meantime, do unmute yourself and ask. I think we're a small enough group for you to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm just moving people around where people have moved. It's left a couple of people, so I'm just moving them.
Okay. It's very exciting.
Okay, I'm moving everyone now. Yeah, so you should get a notification to join.
Okay, thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your talks. Thanks very much, Hannah or Karen, for sorting that out for us. I had a great session, but thank you. And let's go on then with the show, and we're starting our next session with Amita, who is not going to be using slides, so you've got to concentrate, guys. Amita, if you want to tell me when you, oops, I lost my phone. If you want to tell me when you are ready to start.
I'm ready.
My phone at the go. Okay, off you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And hello, everyone. My name is Amita Basu, and I trained as a data scientist many, many years back. And after 15 long years, mostly in consulting, I now lead the UK automation and engineering practice for corporate clients in KPMG. So let me just put it right up front. I have always worked for very large multinationals, profit-making private sectors with clients across the world. So what brings me here today to talk about OR for a better world? I want to share my experience and realization that if we shift our mindset, then one can find ways to do good for society, even if the focus is on profitability. And so let me rewind a little bit. So many years back, whilst I was working for a global consulting firm, I did a pro bono project for the Royal Shakespeare Company to analyze and segment their patrons and help understand who's interested in what kind of productions or plays. Now, this helped Royal Shakespeare to not only get an insight into the tastes and preferences of their customers, but also how to make good use of their limited marketing budget. Now, at this point, I proposed how they would look at the profiles of their current customers and be able to use this data to identify and target similar people who could be their new patrons, thus cultivating and expanding a taste for the arts in society. Now, for a lot of private sector clients, this is regular practice. You use similar profiles to target new customers, but not for those who are not familiar with the various uses of data, like in sectors like the arts. So had I not ignited this discussion, a good set of data with true potential to encourage people to take interest in the arts would have been partially wasted. So now fast forward a few years later, I was working with a very large grocery and retail chain in the UK on demand planning. Now, because the predictive models had not been reviewed for many years, the incorrect set of in-store available products left customers wanting and food wasting. Now, every year, 100,000 tons of readily available and edible food from the UK's retail and food manufacturing sector is wasted. This is equivalent to 250 million meals going uneaten. So when we talk about the food shortage problem in the world today, we sometimes miss the point that taking smaller steps, like making accurate demand models, can be the way to start solving one piece of that puzzle. So I suppose I'm trying to say that even if you do not work on on a not-for-profit basis, there are many ways you can ensure that we can reduce waste in the world today, especially by not wasting data. And this needn't fall outside of the realms of customer savings and corporate profitability. It could be well within it. So let's look at another example of what I do today. My team uses machine learning to identify ways and means of commercial leakage by reconciling tons of different documents, contracts, invoices, timesheets. And this is nearly impossible to do in a timely and accurate manner, manually, given the sheer volume of these documents. So we use intelligent document processing to do this. Now, how does this benefit society? Well, think about when we do it for the public sector clients. These clients are essentially the custodian of public wealth. So when we save money for these clients, we save the wastage of our own money, the ones we pay in the form of taxes. So I would really like those who have jobs like I do, or maybe in future they will have jobs like I do, to think more about the link between society, individual customer savings, and corporate profitability. Not a lot of us have the opportunity to work in areas that directly impact society, but we all do so indirectly. And if each one of us have the intention to improve our lives by using OR, and so by not wasting data, we can actually together increase the chances of doing good in every walk of life. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And I hope this helps you change your mindset a little bit about how OR and analytics can be used for good.
Thank you very much, Amrita. That was great. And I know, I don't know about others, I worked all in the public sector all my life, but I went into the public sector in the belief that that was the only place that you could possibly have a good social impact. And it's not just your talk, Amrita, because I've worked for 30 odd years and discovered and recognized that is that's not certainly not necessarily the case, and quite often not the case. So thank you for bringing that home to us. So if we now move on to Bushra, and Bushra has very kindly agreed to do this talk in spite of the fact that she's actually on holiday at the moment. So we're especially privileged to be hearing from Bushra, and you've probably seen that she works on a whole variety of things and be talking to us about agricultural issues. So Bushra, tell me when you're ready to go. You're on, yes, you're on slideshow. You ready to go?
Yeah, I think I'm ready to go.
Okay,
Can you hear
then.
me? Okay.
That sounds good. So off you go. Thank you.
Okay. I'm very happy to be here today with you, and I'm Bushra Balkan. Currently, I'm working in Wageningen University in research in the Netherlands as a postdoctoral researcher. My own history with OR, I got my first course in OR in 2005, and since then I feel myself as a member of the OR community, and I got the chance to work on different projects which creates social impact, I believe. And today I will briefly summarize my PhD project on agriculture and food value chains. Agriculture and food systems are, of course, vital for all of us, for the humanity, but they are complex because they include multiple stakeholders, they have diverse set of objectives, and there are lots of sources of uncertainties to manage these systems. And we know that OR has been applied to agriculture and food systems for more than 60 years in several different areas, but today I'll give you the example of a national level policymaking problem and with approach with system dynamics simulation modeling. The product in this problem in focus is olive oil in Turkey. Olive oil is a strategic product for Turkey because Turkey is, depending on the harvest year, 4th or 5th largest olive oil producer in the world, and it is supported by government. We are seeing a promising growth in the sector, and as you may guess, it has a supply chain. Like first you need to grow it, harvest it, process it, and then make it reach to the consumers at the end. That was the supply chain part. When we look at the value chain part, we observe unexpected fluctuating and increasing prices along the value chain in the recent years. So the problem was we have a promising sector, increasing supply, but we face with fluctuating prices. So this is a threat to the economic sustainability because in many stages, many stakeholders are being affected with this instability. And with that in mind, we got the modeling purpose of, we need to understand how these value chain dynamics occur. And we would like to make a policy and scenario analysis for economic sustainability to understand what should we do to make the prices less fluctuating, more stable, or make concrete social impact. With that modeling purpose, we built a system dynamics simulation model, which includes both the supply chain, I mean the physical transformation of the product from tree to the consumers, and the value chain, evolution of prices and costs. And at the end, we got a model with more than 200 variables. It was tested, validated, and calibrated for the case of olive oil in Turkey. As the policy and scenario analysis, we checked, what if we make investment on infrastructures? What if we redesign the financial payment schemes? Or what if we empower cooperative action? As an example, I'll share you with just one example with you. We checked, what if we extend the irrigation infrastructures? And we see that, okay, investment creates an increase in fixed cost, but at the end, it increased fruit yield. So we got a win-win policy. We got better prices, less fluctuating prices in the near future, and also we got an increasing social welfare, increasing consumer surplus, increasing producer surplus as well. As the summary of insights, for the specific case of olive oil, we saw that making investments, empowering cooperative action is much more beneficial than making direct payments to these stakeholders. And for the modeling part, putting uncertainty into the model is very crucial, and understanding the dynamics is more important than the budget of intervention. With the same budget of intervention, you may create two different results because you need to understand the dynamics behind it. And the approach of weak string, investing on weak string approach, is not always the best solution because you may end up with unexpected results. You need to consider the system as a whole, not ring by ring. So for further details, you can check my PhD thesis, and thank you for listening my live talk.
Thank you very much, Bushra. So 16 seconds to go. Very, very impressive. So, and also, it's a completely different area of work from what we've heard about elsewhere, and very interesting. And hopefully, our olive oil will continue to flow in spite of all our what we might be hearing later on in our Brexit issues when we come to Mitu's talk. But our next speaker is a late addition to the programme. So if you saw the programme early on when you booked, you won't have noticed Annie O'Donnell, who is joining us from Scottish Water. So thank you very much, Annie. I'm going to hand over to you if you'd like to start sharing your screen when you're ready.
Yeah. Hi everyone. I am just yeah. Can you let me know if you can see the slides?
You can see the slides. You're on slideshow. You're ready to go?
Yeah, ready to go.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Off you go.
Okay, so my talk today is on grouping energy profiles to support net zero carbon ambitions. So in 2019, the Scottish Government announced that we were in the middle of a climate emergency, and they also announced ambitious plans to become carbon neutral by 2045. Scottish Water is one of the largest consumers of energy or of electricity in Scotland. And in response to the Scottish Government's climate emergency, committed to net zero emissions by 2040. Within Scottish Water itself, wastewater operations are the largest consumer of energy, using over half of the total consumption. So there's real opportunity there. So the first question was, can we reduce energy consumption through proactive asset maintenance? And the very quick answer to that is, yes, we can. This is a kind of typical sewage pumping station asset within our wastewater operations branch. And you can see the grey data points down here is when the asset is behaving normally and healthily. And then these red data points is when an electrical or mechanical issue is beginning to arise. If this was to just go untreated, then this would actually break the asset. And the way that sorry, I'm just kind of, right, yeah. And you can see at this point here, when the red kind of returns to grey is when an intervention has been applied. And so we can use energy consumption just to inform asset performance, where higher than normal energy readings can indicate that there's arising issues. Early interventions of this, we've estimated, can save between 7 and 10% of the total energy expended. So there is, that's quite a big hit of an already quite a big bill. To work out these anomalies, we built an anomaly detection algorithm that was a seasonal hybrid model. And this worked really well in proof of concept, and we had all our historical data in memory, but we had hit a real challenge when trying to apply this into a live production. The first one was that the model was applied to every asset in isolation. So there's first of all, like an immediate risk of overfitting with that. The technique that we chose, or the method that we chose, also requires full time series data. And due to signaling issues, there was often missing data. So there was a computational need to then infill that. And then also, because we are modeling each asset in isolation and it's a seasonal model, we needed at least 2 years of data until we could actually assess the performance, which is just not real world suitable at all. So we asked ourselves, well, could we group similar assets together just by looking at the energy profiles and apply anomaly detection to these groups to effectively do what we had proven during the proof of concept. So we did this, and we used a whole time series clustering approach, with a shape-based approach. We split this into 2 steps. So the first one was working out what our distance matrix was between all of the time series points in space. And once we had got our distance matrix, we can then cluster that effectively to make sure that like assets were clustered together. So the two most common approaches to doing this is either using the Euclidean distance or something called dynamic time warping. So you can see in the red and the blue, these are our two different profiles in time. Euclidean distance just measures the distance between these points, and it's a completely static time series axis along the bottom, whereas the dynamic time warping is similar to Euclidean distance, but it doesn't just measure up and down, it measures cross-dimensional and then seeks out the smallest distance so that we can get a kind of a better match. So we went with dynamic time warping for that. To cluster the data, we then used hierarchical clustering because it has a very good visualization power, especially with time series data. It doesn't require the number of clusters to be like an initial parameter, and it also deals, we can apply it to differing time lengths of time series data. And this was our result. So we applied this to 1,600 assets. You can see that the different shapes coming through in the 7 clusters chosen. And
10 seconds.
Thank you. This is the last slide. So we saw an increase of our algorithm by almost 66% when we applied this. And a massive reduction in the amount of data that we could use. So it basically allowed us to apply this at scale. That's me.
Thank you. Well done, Annie. Thank you very much. And again, another completely different approach and another really important area of work. So I think you're the first of our speakers to mention the climate crisis, which is the one that's coming up behind or alongside COVID. So thank you very much, and good luck with the outputs. So that brings us to our final speaker. And I guess, given that most of this audience is from the public sector, she will need relatively little introduction from me, because she's going to know most people. Annie, if you could stop sharing, then we'll bring on Mitu Norris, who is going to talk about how the government OR service is solving everything. I slightly exaggerate, Mitu maybe, but if you can just make us feel good about everything, that'll be great.
Well, I'd love to. I think 5 minutes is quite it's tall order in 5 minutes, but let's see what we can do. Yeah.
Okay, we can see your screen, but I think not on your first slide.
Oh, hold on. Let me just come over. Yeah. Okay.
You're giving us a spoiler there.
Sorry. This is the thing about using not my usual computer. Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Okay, you ready to go?
I am. Thank you.
Brilliant. Then thank you very much. Off you go.
Okay. So I'm Mitu Norris, and I work for the Government Operations Research Service. That's just to give a bit of background for people who aren't in the public sector. That's the central body representing the OR professions across 26 government departments across the civil service. So my talk is more about an overview, and rather than focusing on any particular techniques, etc., because that's not my role anymore. I used to do things like that when I worked in education. So this is more about how the OR profession is trying to impact government policy and is continuing to try and make inroads into that. Okay, so I sort of very frivolously said in my abstract, I'd like to talk about a couple of small topics like COVID and Brexit. Obviously they're not, but they're very, in the news, and you'll all be familiar with them, given that they've been international. It's not just focused on, I don't know, we're always based, currently, we're always sort of focused on London, non-London. This is much wider than that. But I'm hoping to give you a flavour of GORS and our response to the complexities of these two particular issues. So just dealing with COVID, as you know, global pandemic broke out late 2019 as well, and the UK went into its first lockdown in March 2020. Now, with that, we would expect, as we've heard from our previous speaker, health and social care that department will be heavily involved in terms of monitoring. It's not limited to these, but in terms of monitoring, containment, hospitalisation, etc. Those are the things that normally occur to us. But I just wanted to bring into, you're aware of the more wider aspects and how many other departments. And as I say, it's not limited to just these other 5 that I've managed to fit on my slide. It is much wider than that. But the Office of National Statistics, they were very, very heavily involved in all the briefing, not just to Number 10, but across Whitehall to other departments. And we relied very much on their daily updates and, all their regular updates, which were on a, for a live basis. You will have heard, well, Treasury, the Chancellor suddenly introduced a brand new policy which we'd never heard of, which was called furlough scheme. Right, along with that, you'd just think it would be Treasury that would be involved and the impact of that. But as a result of the furlough scheme, both the Department for Work and Pensions and HMRC, it has impact in terms of the economy. It also had a massive impact on the job sector, and especially universal credit. And how does that impact? Because if we're suddenly paying you, what should we be paying you in terms of top-ups, etc. So education department, you wouldn't think that would be help, but how are we going to deal with things like D and A levels? How are we going to award this, given that as soon as we went to the lockdown, children weren't in school, they were not having formal taught lessons anymore. It was, all these departments had to suddenly deal with this very quickly and find responses in a live situation, because now we have 24-hour news. Everything is being reported, not just on a sort of a daily basis, it's on a rolling basis. In a similar sort of way, Brexit. So we, you all know, you're aware, we left the EU on the 31st of December 2020. Obviously, we would expect HM Revenue and Customs and International Trade to be involved because these are trade boundaries. But just to bring one particular thing into an example, I don't know if you all heard about the Percy Pig issue, but Percy pigs, Marks and Spencer sell these. They're actually produced across the border in Europe. When they come across to us, we obviously have to pay taxes on that and duties on that. But when M&S then take those products and give it to the Irish mainland, right, it's crossing 2 borders again because it becomes part of the EU again. These sorts of little intricacies nobody had thought of until suddenly they went, well, we're not paying twice for one product which belongs to us, because that doesn't make sense. And all of a sudden there were these sorts of issues.
10 seconds, me too.
Yeah, Food Standard Agency, similarly, the rules around the preservation of food change because of the EU. So government departments have had to deal with these things pragmatically and quite quickly, because we've had quite a lot of changes in terms of policy. And I think my final slide that says, both these resulted in effective collaborations across departments and across Whitehall. And again, it highlights the positive impact of analysis in terms of developing policy in very challenging circumstances. And the work is still continuing because both of these issues are still very live at the moment. And hopefully, as going back to the title, contributing towards OR for a better world.
Thanks very much, Mitu. You slightly overran there, but I guess you had a bigger topic than many of us, and yeah, leaving quite a few questions to be answered, I think. Now, at this point, I think if you could all, if you're able to unmute and see if we can do a little bit of applause for all of our speakers, I think that would be great. I don't know, it doesn't work terribly well on but you have to do it by the mic and see if it, or by the mic and see if it can be heard. Yeah, it's not just me. Anyway, I thought it was a really interesting range and an amazing range of ways in which OR is actually, and analytics is actually making a difference in the world, and some really interesting speakers as well as the topics. It's the speakers. So I'd like to thank you all. We were going to have further breakout rooms, but I think Mitu was suggested that if we're in this small numbers, if everybody is willing to, if you can turn on your camera, that would be great. And we should be relaxed enough and friendly enough by now just to be able to throw in our questions and comments in a wider group. So I'm going to suggest that we skip our next breakout and invite thoughts and comments. So if anybody would, oh, we have somebody in the waiting room, so late admission. While you're thinking, you could put your questions and thoughts into the chat if you're a bit shy to speak. You can wave your hand at me or stick your hand up using the participants raise hand tool if you wish. But while we're waiting for other people to comment, I'd just like to ask Mitu. I think as ordinary members of the public, we've seen a lot of things going wrong during COVID and during Brexit. And we all think to ourselves, God, if only they got an OR expert on that, then that would improve things, because we don't see what's going on behind the scenes, if there is anything going on behind the scenes. Now, this is a recorded event, so there's limits to what you can say here, but just can you comment on ways that you may perhaps be able to assure the rest of the OR community, or make the rest of the OR community feel good about what OR is doing in government, rather than wondering whether they're being involved at all?
So they are involved quite deeply. I mean, you know, Shamim's on here. I know she was working particularly from DHSC's point of view on the COVID response, as our other colleagues. Actually, is Shannon on here? Shannon was on here before. And
no, Shannon's there.
Yeah, so Shannon in DWP, you know, the impact of COVID, as my slide showed, affected several departments across the board. I think the thing is, you know, just to give a bit of balance, the news, without, you know, it is being recorded, but the news wants to give you newsworthy items as well, so it won't constantly say, and look how great this has been done and that bit. And I'm not saying there weren't mistakes, but there were also a lot of, you know, analysis being used to make informed decisions. But as my colleagues will, you know, hopefully agree, that this was an ever-changing landscape. We haven't had a global pandemic since the Spanish flu. So, with all due respect, you know, I would assume none of us were alive at that time. So we are dealing with a live situation with things changing, and you can only go on the information you have to make that sort of decision for the next bit. I don't know, Shamim, if you...
Yeah, if I can just add, I think actually analysis has become even more important, and analysts within government have become even more important with the work that we've delivered, because you can't, just speaking about the COVID response, you can't do it without the clinical expertise, without the analysis, looking at the data. There's no way you could do that kind of response. So as Minty said, yeah, it was a learning process for everyone, even the experts, you know, no one, even the trained clinical people who've, like, you know, done this all their careers, they'd never experienced a live pandemic before. So I think it's been a positive start kind of thing, for, even though obviously the pandemic itself was a horrible thing, the way that analysis contributed to the response, I think, showed how important data and analysis is.
And I could add something from the private sector side. So without giving away too much, there were consultants involved in doing the geospatial analysis when the first proposal came in to distribute the vaccines. So to understand when, you know, we were thinking of just doing Pfizer, how we could map out the routes to different places, maintaining the temperature that was needed, and what was the optimal way of doing that. So a lot of analysis went behind designing those routes to distribute the vaccine, which I don't think a lot of people know of, and it was a lot of hard work.
I think that's the other thing, is that, you know, it's not always obvious that there's been some analysis behind some of these decisions, because yeah, unless you're working on it, those are the bits that get reported, you know, on the 6 o'clock, on the 10 o'clock news. They won't be, and rightly so, you know, you want your ministers to speak, but I think there's lots going on behind the scenes, and they can't make those judgments without knowing there is some, you know, solid basis. It's not hearsay or this is my best assumption, in a sense.
See the kind of cross collaboration you mentioned across Whitehall to basically just, you know, to come up with plans for COVID and Brexit. Is that usual practice, or is like the kind of pulling together of different teams like that, or different departments? Is that something that you'll carry on going forward? Like, does it work? Well,
so it is usual practice, but it's never been done to such a large scale. I think there's always, you know, there are certain departments that regularly work together. I'd say HMRC, DWP come to mind particularly. Education and health have, you know, because it's the lifespan of a person. You don't just educate someone and then go, well, you're 18 now, bye. It's that sort of thing. But we've never had this where there's been so much overlap and so much interaction of, where, you know, where it's necessary, we will carry on doing that. But these two particular policy, you know, government policy changes have meant that there's several departments all working together on different parts of it. And actually, I don't think that's happened before. To such a large extent.
Yeah, I think the way that we mobilized, so definitely for any kind of, so I work in mental health as well, for any kind of mental health policy that we do, we have lots of cross-government, like stakeholder groups, interaction with the third sector. So we won't make a decision in isolation ever where something impacts society like that. But during COVID, I did feel like we came together much more fluidly and than we ever had before, because that was what was needed during the pandemic. So just as an example of the shielding program that I talked about, so that is a health intervention to protect people who are vulnerable, but also then you have to think about MHCLG was involved, so they're the ones that look after the local authority. So how do you actually deliver food to people who are shielding? Then from a DWP, from an aspect of, well, if people aren't able to go to work, how do we think about kind of how to support them? And then so it was just really a kind of across government, even in the third sector kind of was involved as well. And people just came together because it was needed.
Well, harking back to Annie's talk then, and the climate crisis, could you envisage something similar, sort of similar collaborative efforts on that? And it's different because it's not so immediate, I guess. But it's a.
Is that question to me?
Well, it was really partly to Shamim and Mitu, but we could start with you, because you've done this for Scottish Water. What about all the other water companies? Do you talk to them? Are you in competition with them in the way the electricity companies are?
We are not in competition, but that is different in Scotland because it's based on the way that we're funding. We are like within the public sector. We're not a privatised company, but in England there are privatised companies. But then it's split by region, so there's not the competition that you would expect. We have shared this, the kind of research we've done, and what's notable as well is there's always an idea to kind of go in and like put more sensors in the ground or gather more data, but this was data that was coming off of our electricity bill. This was from Scottish Power, so this is something that was just existed in the ether and could be build something very cheaply to just, reduce that by 10% if we could. So there's definitely, the problem itself could be any type of like asset that uses quite a lot of electricity and has some kind of electrical or mechanical, function could be monitored in this way and proactive maintenance done. But there's definitely, and even across the business, getting all the kind of moving parts working, and kind of bringing on board a lot of our operatives who work in the field to what we're seeing. It was quite a kind of ongoing challenge, because we have usually the way it's run is there's like schedules of when you go out and maintain certain assets at certain times, and we've got lots of pumping stations that are located on the islands or far north of Scotland, but this allows us to kind of quickly see if there's an issue arising before planned maintenance or a planned visit is being scheduled. So yeah, there's lots of interesting applications of it. I suppose the biggest challenge for us was how to deploy it into a live environment, because it does require, well, the original proof of concept requires quite a lot of data, and it wasn't always computationally friendly to just keep like building these seasonal models with mass amounts of data, because like that's what the algorithm needed. So we kind of had to think of a different approach.
I think, as Annie, just said, it's because of the devolved governments. It's not the same situation, here within England, all the water companies are privatised. So actually, you couldn't just step in as government and say, well, why don't you all do this? However, having said that, climate change and the way, the way we think about the climate, you can see that I suppose even if you look back 10 years ago, it wasn't at the forefront as much as it has now. And I'm not saying it's all the Greta effect, but she's had a great effect on it, which is good. But BEIS, it's almost brought BEIS to the forefront now, which is business, industry and industrial strategy is the department. But climate change and the commission, the CCC Commission for Climate Change as well. It's there. Those are the two main departments focusing on these things. But they are very much looking into reusable and everything else to try and reduce. I mean, greenhouse carbon dioxide, your carbon footprint, etc. And so they're looking at all these, and they are developing ways to try and improve that. And equally, like Shamim said, we never do any of this sort of stuff without consulting our wider stakeholders. It really isn't that everybody sits in Whitehall and just sits at their desk. So yeah, there will be a great deal of consultation with both.
It's such an interesting it's such an interesting shift that I'm like seeing, because so I'm used to having like customers, like that customers first and then it's cost, but now it's not. It's kind of like customer, cost, and then carbon is sitting right next to it. And in some case, and actually really carbon probably should be second, but then it's how do we then balance that with cost? Because if you have an asset and it uses quite a lot of energy in some capacity, but it's embedded in already, like there's quite a lot of calculations around what is the, should we swap that out for something that's more carbon neutral, but then you're effectively putting a new piece of material. It's an interesting.
I mean, you'll have seen yourself. It's much further up the conversation. We're talking about electric cars moving on from using and new builds now are supposed to not have gas coming through. It's supposed to, those sorts of things. So in terms of the conversation, it's not just moved on, it's actually implementing changes, looking into the future, which I definitely wouldn't have said we would be there this quick. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, everybody was going, yeah, it's something we should do, but actually not much was being done. And it's moved so quickly. I think the climate has become such a topic of conversation so in a very short space of time.
I'm at the wrong end of my career for this, but certainly from the MOD's perspective,
that's Ministry of Defence for non.
Sorry, yes.
Just in case there's any non-government people here,
the Net Zero 2050 projects are starting to sort of to come through, really just to think about, because it's a very large scale issue, in that if you think electric cars are a challenge, try doing that with tanks. So there's the very broad spectrum of issues that the ministry will be addressing, and I imagine as part of the GAWS community that across government that will, as you say, be floating up the agenda more and more. Whether it's even possible is it would be quite a computational challenge to predict at this stage. So,
I was going to say, I love the idea of a net zero war. So you must be on the right side because you've got a lower carbon emission than the other side. Can I just ask? We've got about 2 minutes to go. Is there anybody who hasn't said anything in this discussion who would like to throw anything in particular from the audience? So and I can see in the audience with their cameras on, we have, is it Shraddha and Meltem and Elizabeth, and of course we've then got some people with their cameras off. If anybody would like to throw anything into the mix, now's your chance.
I mean, only add some issue about the climate change and net zero. Now we are looking at indeed a similar approach for the retrofitted building and also electrification. We are contributing to that net zero approach by the 2050. Not only also generation from the renewable sources, also retrofitting buildings are really important in that issue because we need to turn all buildings that uses from heat to also heating should be electric. That's why also buildings will be, it really requires a huge transformation, not for the generation part, also for the consumption part as well.
Thank you. Well, I'm just going to share my screen for the final bit. Keep talking if you wish to talk. Don't wait on ceremony. But I just want to remind you all, if you have a moment, that it would be great if you could give us some feedback on this link. I will put it in the chat in a moment, and it would also be great if you wish to join WORAN, and that way you'll get the emails that update you on future events as we go. If you actually want to contribute, if you want to be part of the people who are organising WORAN, then get in touch. And sorry, that's the wrong feedback link. It's the one in the chat that you need to go to. So I'm just going to conclude again by, once again, I'd like to thank our speakers. Please feel free. I didn't actually check this with the speakers beforehand, but I'm pretty certain if you would like to contact them to talk about anything that they've said, then they will, I'm sure, be happy to follow up. And I know certainly from my first half breakout room that there were quite a few bits of interest that people wanted to follow up. Don't leave it, because if you leave it, you will never do it. So do it. If you can't see immediately somebody's email address, then just get in touch with me, preferably before tomorrow, because as long as my hospital hasn't yet had its Armageddon, Cybergeddon, then I will be going for a hip operation. So, but if not, then via the OR Society, we can put you in touch with the speaker if you can't find them, or in touch with anybody you met in the breakout room, or in touch with anybody who just looks interesting on the screen, because we're about getting in touch. And thank you once again to all of our speakers. Emilia, I'm going to read it because we have that 7. So Emilia, Glory, Shamim, Amita, Bushra, Annie, and Mitu. I think it's been really, really interesting. It's a shame that so many people are on holiday, but I hope I should just speak now to the YouTube audience. I hope some of you get to watch this as well. It's been great. So thank you all, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you
very much.
Bye. Thank you. It was great.
Bye.
Bye.